So I wasn't planning on doing a video on this year's subject matter, but it's really hard for me to overlook, and I really feel like it's only fitting if I tell you guys a little story about myself, of what made me become flamingo writer as I am today. So without further ado, let's talk about my dad. Hello everybody, it's Flamingo Writer here, back again for another video, and yeah, this is going to be a tad different from my usual videos, so bear with me on this. Now, I'm gonna say this right here and now. Before you say anything, I know that this video is gonna become pointless by the end of the day, but I'm mainly doing this because I really want to get my thoughts out about a certain individual who mean a lot to me, and what's more, it's gonna be 10 years since I've lost him. So if that bothers you, I recommend just watching some other videos. So without further ado, I think it's only fitting to talk about someone who made me the writer I am today, my dad. Let's start at the beginning. It all began when I was just a little kid, which is not always a good sign, because as a kid, I was really an outcast, so much so that I only had very few friends to hang out with. But while most kids just really like to play video games or drawing and still hang out with each other, I was still trying to find a niche for me to stick with because I wanted something that I could do during my spare time. And while hanging out with friends is nothing new, I mean, hell, I still love hanging out with friends. You've seen me have that around to the time when I was doing that Star Giant Productions live stream. But it's pretty clear to me that I wanted to do something that stuck with me, you know, to at least do something when I'm bored. However, at one point as a kid, I found something that's really strange to me that really did become my niche to this day. In this case, writing. Now, I know what some of you guys are thinking. Really? Writing became your niche? Considering that there are so many other hobbies you could have done, that's really the best hobby you could think of? Well, that's because I really didn't know what else to do, though. Though, admittedly, as you can probably guess, writing didn't really become my niche right away. And I was basically like any other first-time writer. My words were sloppy, I didn't know what I was writing at the time, I wrote very scrawl-like. Hell, I didn't even space out the words at times. It was that kind of horrible just to look at what I've written down. If I saw this as an adult back then more than I was as a kid, I probably wouldn't be seeing the end of it. But as time went on, I started realizing that writing did become my niche right after I started writing the first thing I could write. Guess what I started writing down? Yeah, I thought so. Yeah, my name was the first thing I ever wrote, but guess what? I didn't write it as neat as I thought it would have. In case it wasn't clear, my writing was very sloppy when it comes right down to it. Seriously, I wrote my name like this, the first letter being capitalized, obviously, then the first two letters of my name were just lowercase. Then after that, the rest were all uppercase. Yeah, that was how horrible it looked. But nonetheless, I actually did manage to improve over time, so at least that checks out. However, that wasn't the only thing I started writing. I did do other writings and such, but it wasn't until I started seeking more and more as time went on. The writing itself I did was few and far between by all things considered, and it was pretty weird what I've written down. The first thing I ever wrote were lists. And when my dad saw me writing lists down, he was basically encouraging me to write them down because, well, he wanted to see what I could write at the time. But the lists weren't like, say, grocery store lists or something like miscellaneous or anything like that. No, these were lists like, say, lists that I did that require me talking about little Pet Shop Pets and Hot Wheels. Though speaking of Hot Wheels, I did somewhat sneak over to my mom and dad's room just to get those Hot Wheel toys, and I'm not so sure how my dad didn't even notice they were gone, because he did collect Hot Wheel cars. Like, not in just one bunch, but in a bunch of bunches, ranging from trucks to cars to vehicles you can name. He probably had them. And yeah, while I was a pretty dumb kid just to mess around with them because, well, duh, kid me loved toys, I decided to play with those. But it didn't really stick with me as much. And while I did write lists down of what they were and everything, that's how I really memorize things. Yeah, if you ever wonder how I remember stuff, I usually write down stuff as time goes on, and it's really weird when you think about it. I mean, regardless of what you may think, that was the first thing it did, and after he saw it, he really encouraged me to do more writings. I'm not so sure how the list made me get encouraged by that, but okay. Then there was also, the next thing I've written down was guessed it, poems. Now, I was a pretty stupid kid. I didn't know what the hell I was writing when I was writing those poems down. If I had to guess, maybe it's because I was inspired by something lines of one of those there writers that I did read with poems, but I didn't really get attached to poems until I was around a teenager. At that point, when I was a kid, I did write poems, but it was only a small proportion of it. The first poem I ever wrote was called Flower Power, and yeah, I'm pretty sure a lot of my fans are pretty much cringing by now. And it's appropriate considering that I didn't know what the hell I was writing, because I was just saying, flower power, let me take a shower, or something. I don't know what the hell was wrong with me. And as you can probably guess, that's really when it happened straight down to it. Now, as you can probably imagine, the writing itself didn't end there. While my dad did see me write that poem, he still thought it was pretty good. I'm not so sure why he didn't criticize me and thought that I could at least give it a more of a double take or two, but okay. Then the last thing I've written down that made me encouraged by him for my writing would have to be from something like parody lyrics. Yeah, I'm not so sure if it's just me, but did anyone know what parody lyrics were when they were a kid? I sure as hell didn't. And when I started writing parody lyrics, the first thing I ever wrote that was a parody lyric song off the top of my head would have to be Reflection from Mulan. And as a weird kid, when no one was around, I would constantly sing in front of the mirror and pretend I'm Mulan herself. Doesn't really make it that surprising, considering Mulan is one of, if not my favorite Disney princess out there. But when you get right down to it, after writing those lyrics after saying I been spitballing and everything, this is where things started turning a little around the corner at times. See, my dad loved how I wrote those poems, and even more with the songs and everything. But as I was writing them, it did confuse me. Why did my dad like those over anything else? Like, I get that I had other hobbies I could have chosen, but if anything, it felt like to me he saw something that I wasn't expecting myself to do. Like this is what really got him more to seeing my writing as time went on. So I asked him the question, why? Why is it that he really enjoyed seeing what I wrote down? Well, it's because he said to me, and I quote, he saw something in me that he didn't know I had. And I didn't understand that quote, but if I had to guess, maybe it's because he thought there was something I wasn't expecting. I mean, let's get this out of the way. I'm a very self-doubtful person. I really have low self-esteem. I don't know what to expect from myself, and even when it comes to writing, I still doubt myself. I may be a good writer, but even I'll admit I do have my self-doubts at times, so that's probably the most I can get at. But as you can probably imagine, I didn't really just stop there. I kept going and going and going and still managed to do with whatever sticks with me and still managed at that point. I did find other writings to get my inspiration. Like, for example, one of my older sisters, specifically my second older sister, gave me a writing poem that she gave me for my birthday. And when I say that, you know those dedication poems I made? You know, the ones where I make for my friends and everything? Yeah, apparently that's what got me inspired to do other poems as well. Now, at first glance, I didn't understand it, but I think it's only because at the matter of time, I was still trying to find my footing as a writer. And even before that, I did write other stuff, like essays. And yeah, my dad did see the essay I got because we were allowed to take it home and show it to our parents of how we did in our essay. And for some reason, I got top tier for it. I'm not so sure how I did that, but I was crying with joy when that happened. Considering that it was only like, 2 or 3 pages long? Certainly better than 27 pages. Somebody. And when it comes right down to it, I didn't really know what to do. I was really stumped. I was really confused. Like, really? It was really that good? Maybe I'm Walt Disney levels of self-doubt and everything, but even I'll admit that was still a bit of a stretch for me regardless. Like, I couldn't hit on my hands anymore, even if I could try when it comes to writing. So, you're probably asking the big question, what does this have to do with my dad whatsoever? After all, it sounds like he was just coaching me or something. Well, that's because back then, he was like a teacher that I could at least, at time periods, say that he did a lot more for me than I realized. Like, more than I thought as a kid. Now, I realize that being a writer doesn't mean all the time that he was a writer himself. I mean, from what I can tell, the guy himself always wrote something like, say, he would practice signatures, which he did help me practice at times. Then there was also the fact that he also encouraged me to do other sorts of writings, like lists and some stories and anything like that. But speaking of which, he did encourage me to take inspiration, which, for the record, took me a while to understand the inspiration. Yeah, you thought that just because I say you're not supposed to plagiarize means that I never started doing that? Well, that's where things come in topsy-turvy, because I did plagiarize a little bit. Like, this was only when I was starting out for the first few times. As time went on, I started saying to myself that I did become more and more aggressive when it comes to writing my own materials, but I didn't really plagiarize anything like, say, oh, I'm gonna just steal it from there. No, I just plagiarized from songs, not really, say, stories per se. But even with that said, I did write other stuff. Like, say, when I was going through my first breakup, I wrote to depressing songs. When I was trying to find my own footing, and whenever I wrote depressing stuff, a lot of teachers were trying to ask me what was going on with me. And before say anything, I didn't know I had depression at that time. Hell, I didn't know I had it until I got a little older, when I was around 13 or maybe younger. So at that point, I started finding out more and more. I started going on with that. It wasn't really easy to find my own footing as a writer, sure, but even with that said, I still did whatever I could to find it. So I was depressed after feeling like my writing's not getting any place. But then my dad came to rescue, it seems. Yeah, besides all the writing complex and everything, he wasn't the only person who just told me how to say I should learn how to write better, but he did cheer me up by watching a bunch of movies with me. Most of the movies that we watched were usually either Disney related or something from Don Bluth, although admittedly I never told him my favorite animated movie was The Secret of Nim, because, well, at that time we didn't have it on VHS, if you remember from that video. I only watched it on TV. And speaking of which, speaking of Don Bluth, I think if I had to guess what was his favorite movie, I think it has to be All Dogs Go to Heaven, because my dad would constantly put that on that VHS on DVD so he can watch it with me at times, and to comfort me whenever he needs someone like him to be whenever I feel like I'm alone. Now, looking back at that movie, I can definitely say, even if Judith Barcy's song Love Survives is dedicated to her, can I just say for the record, I felt like that was dedicated to my dad as well, even after all of that. I know that sounds kind of selfish, but come on, I still think of that song with my dad involved, saying that our love will still survive. My God, I feel pretty sad now that I say that out loud. And let's not forget that Disney movies that we watch range from something we had on VHS and something that we watch on TV. I can't remember all of the movies we watched, but if I had to guess what movie got me to do more writing, because it really got me into making more fantasy, would have to be Peter Pan. Now, Peter Pan at the time was still something that was my niche during writing. But when it comes to Mulan, I think it's because of how much I looked up to my dad, but it was also because my dad was pretty frail. Like, he was pretty much bones at times with his arms and legs, whenever it was, but nonetheless, he was still someone that I remember making sure he was okay. And even with that said, he still made his sacrifices. Like, he would basically cook for us for some of his Puerto Rican meals and such. It was pretty delicious, the dishes he made. And I couldn't tell you all the dishes he made, but the first dish he ever made for all of us was yellow rice and chicken. Yummy. I'm sorry if I cringe people if I did that. Oh, what am I doing? Oh, yeah. Anyways, after that, he was doing pretty fine and dandy. That is, until things started turning all topsy-turvy. Yeah. My folks weren't around too much. I mean, the only things I did get to do with my dad was basically those things. But it wasn't until we started separating away from each other. Yeah. My folks weren't in an argument, at least I don't think they were, but if they were, I couldn't remember if they were in an argument, because I don't know what caused them to split up. I can't say for sure. And what's more, I was probably at school during the time, so I couldn't really say what happened. What I can tell you, however, is that it did break me, but at least he was next door. okay. I don't know why it had to be next door, but afterwards he did move into an apartment building. I'm guessing that the neighbors and him were close buddies or something like that. I really can't recall. But what I do remember is that I used to go over to his place just to hang out with him and such and see how things are going and to make sure he's okay. Of course, I had asked permission because, well, I don't want my folks to worry. And yeah, this is where we couldn't really stay living in the same neighborhood after that. We moved a lot. I mean, seriously, my folks and I, we move a lot, and this is why I said I barely got a lot of television or a lot of free time. You thought that growing up as a kid was hard enough? Well, try taking a job at 12 years old. And yeah, speaking of which, though, whenever I did get money for my job, I usually ask him to take me out shopping. Whether it's for my writing utensils, whether it's for something like food or anything else we need, I would basically have him take me shopping whenever I had the chance. But that's where things started getting a little crazy. Oh boy. I don't know where to begin, but I guess I can start right when I was turning a teenager. Now, as a teenager, I was pretty depressed, but with my dad, it was more like, say, I'm still trying to find out what I can do to make myself happy. And by making myself happy, I can only do that only very few times. And it still wasn't good enough at the time. And it went on, though. So, what I'm about to tell you guys is probably going to dwell you into tears. So, grab your handkerchiefs or tissues or whatever. I don't really know what you guys use to wipe your nose or anything, so let's start at the beginning. From what I can tell, my dad was still trying his best to do whatever he can to help us out. But it wasn't always enough. Yeah, I can tell you right now, my dad was always making sacrifices, sure, but he was also one of those people who did whatever he could, but he pushed himself too far. So much so that around when I was around 14 or 15, the last time I went shopping was the last time. Yeah, he took me on a drive every now and then besides shopping, but even with that said, he would usually take me to other places as well, like going fishing, which was one of, if not his favorite hobby out there, and he would also I love the gifts I got him, like a backpack of baseball cards, which is something I remember giving him for Father's Day or his birthday. I can't quite remember. It's been years since then. But I do remember how much he really enjoyed them. But even beyond that, I still feel pretty bad. I couldn't do the most I could have out of him for the sake of it. So let's get this out of the way. When it comes right down to it, my dad was still all around, not just motivating me as a writer, but to help anyone else out in the family, but he also was getting sick. I can't say what it was, because not only can and I'd never say what it is, but I also feel like even if I did say it, my channel would probably get blocked afterwards, so you're gonna have to take what I can with a pinch of salt. For what I can gather, my dad was still getting sick, like sicker than usual. He was really hungry. He was trying his best to make as much sacrifices, and even then, when I went to come home from work just to see if he was okay, because that's how bad and ill he was, he didn't really remember me. Like, again, I don't know what it was that caused his memory to black out like that, but what I do know is that he just said, "Is that you, baby?" And I said, "Yes," but he didn't really remember me. It was at that time where he started really flickering his mind after that. Yeah. But even when I was trying to say how I felt about this, though, I told him that I'm going to hold on to his hand as much as I can so I can at least tell him everything will be okay. But unfortunately, I couldn't say that, because guess what? My first older sister, of all people, had to break it up for me. Seriously, my first older sister, of all people, had to break up this entire conversation by saying to me, XYZ, yeah, I'm not going to say my real name if it wasn't obvious. Anyways, XYZ, you get downstairs and watch my son. And I was holding on to my dad's hand because I wanted to make sure he was all right. Unfortunately, after going downstairs to watch my first nephew, because he was all I had to watch at that time. This was during the time when my first sister was still going through some sort of angering moment. I'm not so sure why she got angry at me. I was just coming home from work just so I can at least see if my dad was all right, but no, I can't even do that, it seems. But after watching my first nephew, she started going all topsy-turvy. This is the most bipolar I've ever seen from her, saying things like, "Why aren't you seeing Dad?" When I was I'm just ready to rage, which I didn't say it to her directly, but part of me wanted to say, bitch, you wanted me to watch his son, and now you're saying I shouldn't really watch your son because of that? Granted, it was a two-story apartment, but even so, though, what the hell? You wanted me to see Dad, then all of a sudden you go so far as to say things like, oh, you should have seen Dad when you had the chance. And here's the sad part. You know what's the sad part of all of this? That was the last time I ever saw him in person. Yeah. After they took him away from the family so he can see if he can get better, I wanted to visit him. I wanted to call him up just to see if he was okay, but nothing came about. Like, at all. I wanted to make sure he was alright, but part of me knows that he wasn't alright. Like, so much so that it really hurt me. That he couldn't really see by all things considered, though. And the sad part is, after I got the news he passed on, a month after I turned 16, I couldn't see him anymore. I didn't get to say goodbye to him. Granted, I know some people are going to say when you say goodbye, it's never a goodbye, but still, it hurts me when I never got to say my last words to him. I was 16 when he passed away. He meant a lot to me. I wouldn't say my dad was perfect. Like I said before, he had his moments, but still. And we used to do so much together. Not just motivating each other, but he also protected his family. He was also getting some stuff that we can all enjoy. Whether they were her books or something like food or anything to make sure we had a roof over our head. Anything. Unfortunately, I couldn't really say my piece on him because someone had to ruin it for me. Seriously, I could not tell you how pissed off I was when that happened. So much so that it really gave me an aneurysm. But after I got the news that he passed on, it wasn't until I started realizing something else. Like, so much so that after I got the news, I stayed home from school, and I wanted to stay home from work, but unfortunately, I couldn't even do that, I guess. Seriously, I don't know what it was with most people around where I'm from that have a problem with me staying home from school or work. But I will say, though, it's really easy to say. They really can't grasp on that. After staying home from one day off from school because my fucking math teacher, my first math teacher I ever have to go to whenever I had to go to school, had to say this to me. You want to know what she said after I stayed home from school when I said my dad passed on and I couldn't go to school that day? She said, and I quote, "That was bound to happen." Like, I could not tell you how pissed I was. That made me so raging and fitting that I could not tell you how much that would have been my dad's position if he heard that line. I swear to God, if my dad did hear that line, he would not hear the end of his temper. That's how pissed off he would get. Like, so much so to the point where it's obvious he would do anything to make sacrifices against all odds. And yet, for some reason, they had to say that to him. Look, it's one thing you didn't know my dad, but it's another when you realize that my dad meant a lot to me. And this is how you go so far as to say, oh, that was bound to happen? Like, at the very least, even if you don't know my dad or have never met my dad, at the very least, you could at least keep your mouth shut if you don't have anything nice to say about it. And I'm not here to be parasocial. I'm not. I'm not saying my dad was the only person I looked up with. I looked up a bunch of people. My family, my friends, my those connections with anybody else out there. Anyone out there I could get myself on. But as you can probably guess, that really did make me rage. Like, more than usual. So you can probably imagine why I always say I protect those around me more than, say, myself around that time. And yet, after all this time, that's all I can say about my dad. It's really heartbreaking to see that happen, especially now. So, what happens now? Well, by the time I'm making this recording, I know that this sounds like all jibber-jabber with what I was doing in the background, but honestly, I wanted to do this video because I just wanted to dedicate something to my dad. He was a motivator. He was someone I could at least look up to. He was someone who cooked for us, made sure we had clothing, made sure we had a lot of stuff for ourselves. Yes, my other folks do that too. I mean, hell, we do whatever we can to support each other by the end of the day. But the sad thing is, though, even after never getting to say goodbye to my dad, I just hope that this memoir means more to him than one may realize. But I'm not so sure if anyone would take that. You can see this video as say I'm just some dumbass flamingo who's just trying to get out there, but what do I know? A parent it's not just there because they're parents. They're there because they care for us. They protect us. They love us. And what's more, they do whatever they can to make sacrifices to make sure we have whatever we have. I know that a lot of people aren't gonna listen to me, but honestly, I don't know what else to say beyond you guys do realize that I do care for you guys more than you may think. I wouldn't have it either way. I wouldn't have done writing if it wasn't for my dad. I wouldn't have been so protective if it wasn't for anything else I've had. But I know that by the end of the day, it's gonna cost more than just that. But let's get the bare basics out of the way while we still can. See, in the beginning of the video, I did say that I was going to explain what I was making in the background, and I was making a catalog because, in case you guys need to know, my dad collected a lot of catalogs, ranging from National Geographic to fishing to basically anything he could get himself on. And it has something to do with flamingos, so at least I can say that. Speaking of the flamingos, you're probably wondering why I always say that my dad introduced me to flamingos. Well, that's because my dad and I used to watch a lot of stuff with flamingos involved, not just with Discovery Channel, but as well as, say, Captain Flamingo of all things. Oh, looking back at that show, I'm not gonna say it was the worst thing out there, but it was not really the best thing out there. But hey, I still will enjoy what I made nonetheless. And I hope to any divine power you guys understand why I chose this writing path to begin with. It really means a lot to me, more than you may realize. But in spite of all of that, I might as well just look. By the end of the day, I'm just some random person who's just being a writer because, well, that's who I am. I'm a Flamingo writer, and I'm here to say that, Dad, if you're watching this, te amo, Pablo, mi papi. I love you so much from the bottom of my heart. I wouldn't have it either way. Seriously, I really can't help but say that I'm glad you guys have been with me throughout this whole time period. Now, with that said, I thank you all so much for watching. See you all next time, and as always, stay flamingo-tastic. I'll see you all.